Only 3, Matthews protested. 3 was barely a scouting party, much less a suitable expedition force. I was promised 9 at minimum. Tana put her feet up on her desk loudly. Best I could do, Matthews. Your name doesn't hold the weight it used to. Matthews knew it was true, but this was the first time one of his own friends has said as much. He noticed how cold Tana had become toward him since he told her he intended to continue his mission. 10 years gone, he had been at the head of an Imperial-sanctioned excursion to properly chart the province of Black Marsh. The borders have been defined well enough, but the information about the heart of the swamp was scarce and unverifiable. Even the established description disseminated by the Empire to citizens was a stitched-together narrative from numerous questionable accounts. The venture was considered a failure. His crew had dwindled one by one as the expedition stretched on, either through death or desertion. Tana had been the only one to stay with him, but she contracted a disease that made her delirious and unable to remember the last days of their journey. And so, when Matthews had returned to the college, speaking of lost cities and ancient civilizations, he found himself against a wall of skepticism with no other witness to verify his claims. His relationship with Tana was never the same after that. The marsh had changed both of them, and the aftermath had not been easy for either. He had hoped they could mend old wounds and return together, but Tana had flatly refused him, saying she would never return to Black Marsh. She did offer to help him put together a crew, and Matthews knew he should be grateful that anyone would help him at all. At least tell me they're seasoned. He had hoped for that, if little else. You're in luck, Tana said, glancing over some papers. Well, assuming you can get along with a high elf. She's a battle mage, so I'm sure you'll find a way. Salara is her name. Never heard of her. Matthews raised a brow. He would be pleased to have such a skilled companion, but something told him to be wary. Why would a battle mage join me? Tana shrugged. It isn't a sanctioned mission as far as I can tell. My contacts don't know anything about her either. Maybe she wants to go for her own reasons. We can't exactly be particular in this case. Matthews nodded. He would have to keep an eye on this elf. And the others? Riffin, a runaway slave. He's a young Nord, but eager. You know how important that will be. Before you argue, he can read and write, and has some skill in hunting and foraging. He survived on his own this long after all. Give him a chance. An extra pair of hands was never bad, and the crew would be small enough that the young man couldn't get in the way. Still, Matthews felt bad knowing how hard the journey would be on someone unprepared for it. And the third? You still haven't mentioned the guide. We won't get anywhere without a willing Argonian. You remember that much at least. Matthews regretted saying that, but Tana ignored it. Rivergills, she said, an experienced Argonian guide, just like you asked for, and with only one catch. There's a catch? Matthews sighed. You offered him the sum I promised? I did. Try to let me finish. Tana paused, seemingly just to make him wait. Rivergills will take you part way, at which point he promises to introduce you to someone who can get you where you want to go in half the time. A sensible person would walk away from this, Matthews thought, but he knew he couldn't. He had waited a decade for another chance, slim as it might be. Matthews has heard there were more secretive tribes in the swamp that knew hidden paths, and the idea of making safe contact with them was enticing enough to embolden him. Very well, Matthews said. Thank you, Tana. He turned to leave, but stopped short of a door. Is there truly nothing I can say to make you come with me? It should be the both of us. I told you, I won't return to Black Marsh for all the gold in all the known worlds, Matthews. And I wish there was something I could say to make you stay. The sun was still high as they at last reached a suitable clearing for a camp. They could continue on, but many an expedition had become lost thinking they could chase the last bit of light. Early morning was the best time to travel. The swamp was sleepy and full come dawn. Matthews set to gathering what he would need for a fire, taking care to stay near his companions. He decided to look for sticks and ferns as well. They could be used to hide the light, which Matthews knew was a wise thing to do this deep in the marsh. He chose to say nothing of this to his new companions, who were as tired as they were bored. They say ancient Argonians had golden scales that could blind lowly men and mer. Matthews hoped reminding the crew of the significance of their mission would raise their spirits, and the embellished version always made for a better campfire tale. They built their greatest city higher and higher until they reached the sun. What happened then? Young Griffin asked. Matthews had to admit he enjoyed the young man's curiosity. He intentionally held his answer, half hoping Rivergills would volunteer his own. Everything Matthews knew of these legends had been the work of other imperial explorers and scholars. He had never managed to get an Argonian to speak of it. Rivergills simply sat basking in the sun as if he wasn't listening at all. As far as Matthews could tell, the Argonian was asleep. Some say it devoured them, Matthews continued, dropping off a bundle of sticks. Others say they cracked it open like an egg and became gods. The elf Salara scoffed. That's ridiculous, she said. Everyone knows the sun is not an egg. Thus far, Matthews had learned little of the battle mage other than she was wholly committed to her own beliefs, most of which he recognized came from the guild teachings. What is it then? Riffin asked. A hole. Riffin scrunched his nose and looked up. That's supposed to be a hole? Don't stare at it, Matthews sighed. Do you not believe in the Golden City, Lady Salara? Riffin asked. A sailor told me it was just a story. She needs to be sure, Matthews offered. Salara had refused to give her personal reason for joining the expedition, so he guessed. Salara turned away from them and stared into the brush. She took out a broken compass and held it tightly. I expect something of value could still be learned, Salara answered, even if everything they believed is wrong. Rivergills opened his eyes. For 3 days they traveled by water, and at night Rivergills would show them where it was safe to stop and rest. On the first day, Rivergills made them stop under a rocky outcropping on the river bank for several hours without ever saying why. Matthews passed the time teaching Riffin about many of the strange plants and animals that occupied the swamp. He was far more interested in those he could not name, but he would not let himself be distracted by thoughts of trapping them for study. There were many-colored birds, giant beetles with shells the size of boulders, and scaled hounds that roamed in packs and fed on the carcasses of grey behemoths. Matthews could think of no names for any of them. By the time they resumed their journey, night was falling. Rivergills assured them this was the time to travel despite protests from the rest of the group. Matthews made the call to trust their Argonian guide, and so down the river they continued. Even Salara joined them in gazing into the swamp, as it was now alight with strange luminescent jellies that passed mournfully through the trees. On the second day, Riffin spotted something and called out, "Look!" Salara gasped. Matthews turned to look and was stricken as speechless as the others. Rising from the mire were great wings of metal, like the wings of a moth. Even through the moss and muck, Matthews could make out the twin domes of layered glass eyes. He wondered how magnificent such a thing must have looked whole, whatever it was. Rivergills did not turn his gaze from the winding river before them. The fins on his head vibrated so quickly they made a low hum. "We have to stop. I must see this." Salara's voice carried a tremor. She held a hand out to Rivergills. "We cannot stop," Rivergills said patiently. "A leviathan has been trailing us for some time now." Salara paused for only a moment and then jumped from the raft, causing the rest of them to struggle to keep their footing. "Salara!" Matthews yelled as he tried to shift his weight and balance the raft. "Rivergills, slow us down!" "We cannot stop," said Rivergills. Salara moved as quickly as she could through the muck, ignoring the protests of the crew. She unfastened her cloak and let it fly free so she could move more easily. She flailed and splashed as she made for the strange moth. "Lady Salara, come back!" Riffin yelled. She trudged slowly now, struggling in the mire. She stopped and began to whisper words of power Matthews assumed would aid her movement. He saw she had the broken compass in her hand. Suddenly, it was as if the swamp itself dragged her down and swallowed her up. She disappeared without making a sound and never resurfaced. Matthews could just barely make out the shape of something huge moving through the water. He noticed that even the insects have gone quiet. Salara's cloak drifted listlessly, the clasp of her order the only thing remaining of her story. "We cannot stop," said River Gills. No one argued. In fact, they did not speak again that day. At night, they slept in a tree the size of a village. The next morning, Matthews woke to find Riven was gone. He had left a note saying he had seen the torchlight of a nearby settlement from and was going to see if they could help him get back to civilization. He apologized for abandoning them. Matthews knew the young man was already dead. River Gills made no comment when Matthews said they were now simply two. That day, they finally returned to hiking, and though it was difficult terrain, Matthews found he preferred it. Still, his thoughts were troubled by memories of his previous expedition as they traveled. River Gills would not take him much further, and Matthews had no idea what to expect from the next guide. He remembered what it was like to be afraid and alone in Black Marsh. On the third night, River Gills expanded his fins and began to hiss, and then bade Matthews to take shelter in a cave. River Gills remained outside, and for the remainder of the night Matthews could not sleep. All through the night he swore he could hear chanting and the hissing of snakes. The Argonian reappeared in the morning as if nothing had happened. "Nebuta will see you now," River Gills said, and when he left, he never returned. There was the sound again. Matthews waved his torch fruitlessly. He could see nothing in the choking mist. He held his cloak to his mouth with his free hand and ran deeper into the cave. He caught sight of the creature's shadow, massive and bulbous. It was following him. He ran on, gasping for breath. He heard an echo of belching laughter. It went on until Matthews thought he must be going mad. Then he heard the crunch of bones under his feet. The mist cleared and he found himself standing in a chamber lined with skulls of all shapes and sizes. Bones of things he didn't recognize littered the floor. He thought of the vile voroplasm set to eat creatures whole and spit out their bones. "That will be my end," he breathed. He should have known the Argonian was lying. Matthews felt the air in the chamber change. There came a stench so foul that it burned his nostrils. A voice bellowed. "Another fleshling come to deal with Nebuta? Speak in whole before I swallow." In a dim torchlight, Matthews could just barely make out the grotesque creature's form. This was no plasm, though it glistened with a disgusting wetness. It was some kind of a giant toad with rotund belly and a squished slug-like face. The eyes were the worst of all, and in them Matthews saw forbidden knowledge and boundless horrors. He steeled himself as the creature's throat bulged. Forbidden knowledge was why he came to this decrepit place after all. The creature swallowed, and suddenly it was looming over him. Nauseating fumes trailed from its nostrils. "I seek the path to the golden stair," Matthews spat out. He was not proud of how his voice cracked. The creature reared back and either choked or laughed. It belched after, Matthews knew, for he nearly fainted. "I can show you," the slug thing croaked, "for a price." "Of course, good Lord of Mok," Matthews said, wishing he hadn't. He knew better than to think he could appease the thing with flattery. Best to just stick to business. "What will this information cost me?" Fat arms reached into a pocket. Matthews had not even noticed the creature was wearing tattered robes of green and brown. Knobby wet fingers produced a sparkling yellow gem set into an ornate golden amulet. It was flawless and gleaming. But Matthews was no novice to cursed relics or strange gems. He drew his sword and waited. His heart raced, though whether with fear or excitement he couldn't tell. Was this a relic of old Argonia? The creature's chin wiggled grossly as it laughed. It draped the amulet across the horned skull of some ancient beast, leaving it dangling there, glinting in the torchlight. "You will take this to the Golden City for Nebuta. That is the price." Matthews furrowed his brow. And what am I to do with it once I get there? You will know, Nebuta whispered. Matthew's skin crawled out the way the words tickled inside his ear. Just before you die. For a moment, Matthews thought the creature was right beside him, but he blinked and saw it had not moved. Tell me the way, he managed to say. You cannot get there from here, said the Lord of Mok. You must go deep as the roots in water, down and around and between places even your gods have never seen. Matthews found himself unable to speak as the creature burped and finished. I will take you as far as Xul Axith. Matthews breathed despite the stench and sheathed his blade. He stepped forward and picked up the golden amulet. It felt warm. I don't plan on dying, he said, slipping the amulet into his pack. I hope that won't disappoint you. The creature's belching laughter echoed until Matthews found himself standing alone. The light of his torch nearly burnt out. Matthews retched, either from the stench of his traveling companion or from slipping upside down through the marsh again. The slug thing Nebuta laughed. Now you see, little fleshling. This realm is deeper than it is wide. Matthews didn't see at all. It was the third time they had slipped into the river, as Nebuta called it, and each trip only made him more disoriented. This last time he could have sworn he was watching himself drown. It felt like I was dreaming, Matthews said. He coughed up a mouthful of sticky water. You were. The Lord of Mok offered nothing more, just pointed a stubby finger. Matthews followed it and saw an archway of black stone above a clear path through the surrounding swamp. The archway was carved with image of snakes and roots twisting around each other, and at its top was a skull with a forked tongue. He realized he would have to continue the journey alone from there, and his guide was unlikely to give him further aid. They reached the gates of Xul Axith. He feared it wouldn't prove close enough. Matthews had an idea. He took out the golden amulet Nebuta had given him. You have honored your word, Lord of Mok, Matthews said, and I will keep mine. I will see this gem returned to the Golden City if I ever find my way. Nebuta burped and growled. Its strange eyes considered the amulet for a moment. Stay on the path until you see a temple that bleeds shadows. It is a place of death. Do not enter it. When you stand before it, find the sun in the sky and walk that way. You will know when you are there. Matthews was about to protest when the Lord of Mok suddenly slithered back into the river and was gone. For a moment Matthews felt panic grip his chest. His companions had deserted the journey one by one, and suddenly he wondered if they had been right. He considered abandoning his mission for the briefest of moments before realizing his only path forward was the one of black stone. The river had dried up under his feet. Matthews gathered his courage. The amulet was warm in his hand. He stepped under the archway and onto the path. The ancient Argonian strode towards Matthews then, screeching in some guttural tongue. It was 2 heads taller than an average Saxhleel, with golden scales, bright feathers of red and purple and green, and great curving horns. Over its head was a mask of gold carved in the visage of a bird. It wore feathered robes and golden bangles, and when it spread its arms, it appeared to have wings. Matthews could hardly tell where the creature ended and its ornamentation began. He had no time to ponder it, as the golden terror raked at him with painted talons. It roared a curse. Through Matthews could only translate 3 of its words: sun, fire, and death. Matthews staggered back, unable to draw his sword as the creature bore down on him. It was clawing desperately at the yellow gemstone around his neck. Matthews fell backwards and managed to pull out his sword just as the bird lizard fell atop him, screeching. He stabbed blindly at it with one hand while pressing against the creature's throat with the other, trying desperately to keep its claws from shredding him. Again and again it scratched at the amulet, trying to tear it from his neck. Matthews heard the gemstone break. Yellow dust floated through the air. The Argonian was very still then. Matthews breathed a sigh of relief that he had killed it at last. His arm was tired. Suddenly, it moved again with blinding speed. Clawed hands shot out and cupped his face. He half expected to hear snapping of his own neck, but it just held him in a vice grip. The golden mask slipped from one side of the creature's face. Now it was not a bird or a lizard, but a snake. He saw that its scales were not gold but painted, and the mask had worn away some of the paint. The scales were black and white and mottled, falling away from a dead thing. Its eyes were hollow sockets, but the dust flowed into them until they were yellow. Out of fear or courage, Matthew struck once more, plunging his sword into the snake. At the same time, the golden mask slipped off and clanged to the floor. There was blood on the inside. Matthew saw the snake's face was changing over and over again. 12 times it changed before it was a snake again. He had forgotten about killing this creature, forgotten about fighting for his own life, even forgotten why he had come to Black Marsh in the first place. All Matthews knew then was terror. He was falling, then flying. The world rushed up to meet him, all fire and glory and madness. He felt a current on wings he did not remember having, and he soared. He flew over the cities of gold and cities of black stone. They were endless, like the hiss that cradled them. The sky was aflame, and the sun was a pit. Still he flew, for he had not the strength to do more than let the current carry him. He came upon a tower. It was tall and vast, and many trees grew from its many layers of marsh. Creatures lived and died without ever knowing of a world outside the tower. At its top was a tree that bled fire. Other winged things that looked like him circled it. They cried out in words he understood but didn't know. He felt a deep sadness as the tower fell away. He looked up and saw other worlds and other towers. They were spinning wheels, and they crashed into each other, and their spokes got tangled up and they broke each other. And he saw that his world was breaking too, but quick as a snake a shadow came and swallowed up the roots of the tower so they would not break. Still he flew. There was only fire and darkness then, and so much noise, but he was too tired to be afraid. And so Matthew slept and drifted away into black sun.